Let's talk a little bit about my project, why I want to do something that's better than Discogs. You already know I think Discogs sucks, and I think I can do a better job. The reason I want 1,000 followers on YouTube before I start doing any kind of programming is because this will not be my site. This will be our site. I already have a site that I worked on for 25 years that is perfectly the way I want to display records and collect my collection. I already have that. Now, I'm building something for other people. So I do need 1,000 people from around the world to know what other people except me think should be on a site that's supposed to be better than Discogs. Maybe some things on Discogs are actually good. I can't think of any, but maybe they have some features who I cannot improve on. Now, there's one thing my site does differently from Discogs, and it has to do with releases. Discogs creates something called a master record, but the problem is, a master record doesn't actually exist. It's a fake record used only to group different releases. Discogs currently has about 19 million records and about 2.5 million masters. Recently, they improved the design a little. It's now easier to see whether you're looking at a real record or a master. But the system is still confusing. Real records and fake master records are mixed together. I want to do something simpler. Instead of creating a fake master, I use a real master. The master is simply the original release. Let's take an example. Poog. This album was released in 1969, so that release becomes the master record. When you click the album, you go directly to that release, not to an index page. It doesn't always have to be the very first pressing. Sometimes it makes more sense to choose the most common version. For example, the very first pressing of this record had black printing, and it's extremely rare. Shortly after, a second version appeared with yellow printing. That's the version most people know, so in this case it might be better to use the more common release as the master. The absolute first pressing can sometimes be a promo copy, an advance copy, or even a misprint. Instead, it's often better to choose the first real public release. Sometimes it's hard to know which release came first. For example, when a CD and an LP are released at the same time. In cases like that, you simply choose a master release. I think this approach makes much more sense. You don't need thousands of artificial master records. Instead, you choose one real record as the master. And if needed, you can change it later. Everything below the master becomes children releases. And below those, you can even have grandchildren releases. Let me show an example. On this record, you can see both the black version and the yellow version. In the details section, I also include information about different pressings and label logos. Right now, this information is only written as text, but eventually you will be able to add separate releases with different matrix numbers and pressings and place them in the correct order. The same logic also applies to the marketplace. Some collectors only want this particular record. They don't care whether it's an American pressing, a reissue, or the original release. What they care about is the music on the record. In fact, many collectors are like that, especially casual collectors. They simply want a copy of the record so they can listen to the music. Others are more specific. For example, someone might want a 60s pressing with the yellow label. Now let's compare this with Discogs. Discogs uses a master record system. In this case, the master is the black version because people agree that it came first. But here's the problem. Discogs does not display the black version first. Instead, releases are sorted automatically, first by year and then by the record ID. For example, this release is 714, and this one is 745. Because of that, the order can become incorrect. And the problem is, you cannot manually correct the order. I see this issue very often on Discogs. If a band releases several records in the same year, they may appear in the wrong order, and there is no way to fix it. That's why I think a manual ordering system simply makes more sense. How could I build something better than Discogs? To be honest, Discogs isn't particularly good. It mainly works because it never had any real competition. The code is very old and the system feels outdated. At first, I thought about hiring developers in India to build a completely new site, but that would be very expensive. Discogs itself cost a lot to build. Then something unexpected happened. I discovered ChatGPT. I'm actually a novice coder, but with the help of ChatGPT, I suddenly became much more productive. I could work 10 times faster, and the cost? About €7 per month. So instead of hiring a team, I started rebuilding my old website from scratch. And now, I believe something surprising. I think I can build this entire project on my own, with help from ChatGPT. Of course, some parts will be difficult, and it will take time, but it's absolutely possible. The real question is different. Do people actually want it? Because right now, I already have a site that works perfectly for me. This idea will only work if people are willing to move from Discogs to a new platform, but I think I know how that could happen. Most large Discogs sellers actually run real record stores. You can't store 1 million records in your closet. Store owners care about one thing above all. That's how a business survives. So, if I can offer lower fees, many sellers would seriously consider moving. Of course, some people resist change. That's why there are still thousands of sellers on MusicStack. But here's the key point. When sellers move to a new platform, they bring their records with them. And when enough sellers move, the buyers will follow, especially if the new platform is better. And Discogs actually makes this easy. You can export your listings. Importing them to a new site could take less than a minute. Now, the closest thing to a competitor today is MusicStack. MusicStack is actually older than Discogs, and it still exists. The code is more than 20 years old. They still use tables, just like I did on my old website, but MusicStack still has a few thousand dedicated sellers, and they have some interesting features. For example, they show something called a fill rate. That tells you how many orders a seller was actually able to complete. In other words, did the seller really have the records in stock? They also show response time. That means how quickly a seller replies to messages. That's actually very useful information. So MusicStack isn't worthless. It still has a community of dedicated sellers. Now let's talk about something else. Shipping on Discogs. Honestly, it's a mess. If you want to do shipping properly, it can take several days. You have to create shipping policies for every country, every weight category, and then verify it with your postal provider. That's the only proper way to do it, unless you choose the lazy solution. Some sellers simply charge $10 worldwide, which obviously makes no sense. That's why so many sellers end up using very poor shipping settings. They simply don't have time to configure everything correctly. But there is a much better way, and it already exists. This is how Tradera works. Tradera is basically the Swedish version of eBay. It's actually owned by eBay. Tradera negotiates shipping prices with multiple carriers. Because of that, users get better prices than they would get individually. You don't need to configure anything. You don't need to type addresses. You don't need to register shipments. You simply press Print Shipping Label. Everything else is automatic. That's the system I want to build. Discogs actually has something similar, but only if you live in the United States. You can print shipping labels directly on Discogs, but only through USPS and only inside the United States. So imagine something better. What if you could print shipping labels with multiple carriers to any country in the world, automatically? That's the idea. That's what I want to build. And honestly, who wouldn't prefer that? So if you want to see something better than Discogs, just subscribe to the channel. And wait, I'll see you in the next video.